Sometimes the smallest knock can open the biggest secrets. This is the story of Maya, a 12-year-old girl selling candies to save her sick grandmother, and how her simple visit changed the life of a lonely billionaire forever. Stay tuned till the end. You won't believe what destiny had planned for them. The evening air was sharp with the chill of winter, and the narrow streets of the old neighborhood buzzed faintly with the sounds of life winding down. Amid the noise of distant cars and flickering streetlights, a little girl moved from door to door, her small basket filled with colorful candies that sparkled under the fading sunlight. Her name was Maya, just 12 years old, yet her eyes carried a quiet strength that seemed older than her years. Each day, after returning from school, she walked through the same cracked sidewalks, calling out softly to strangers, "Candies, sir. Sweet ones, ma'am," hoping to earn enough coins to buy her grandmother's medicine before the next hospital visit. Her shoes were torn at the edges, her coat too thin to fight the cold, and yet her smile never wavered. Neighbors would often whisper, "That's Maya, the candy girl with the big heart." Some gave her a coin out of pity, others out of admiration. But no one really knew the depth of her struggle, how every night she sat by her grandmother's bedside, counting coins with trembling fingers, whispering promises that one day things would be better. The small house they lived in had cracks in the walls and a leaky roof, but Maya's laughter filled it with more warmth than any fire could. That day, as the sky turned pale and the wind grew colder, Maya looked at her basket. Still half full. She knew the medicine shop would close soon, and she hadn't earned enough. Her little heart raced with worry. She bit her lip, glanced toward the end of the street, and noticed the wide road that led to the city's richest neighborhood, a place she had never dared to go before. The thought frightened her, but desperation pushed her feet forward. As she walked past the bright street lamps and tall gates, her steps slowed. The air smelled different here, cleaner, quieter, almost too still. She looked at the beautiful houses that seemed to touch the clouds, each one glowing softly in the dark. Finally, she stopped in front of a massive white mansion. It stood behind tall iron gates, surrounded by trimmed gardens and marble statues. To her, it looked like something out of a dream, or maybe a world that didn't belong to her. For a moment, she hesitated. Her breath fogged the air as she whispered to herself, "Just one more house, Maya. Maybe they'll buy one candy." She gathered her courage, straightened her coat, and knocked gently on the gate. The echo of her small hand knocking on the heavy metal sounded strange, too loud in the stillness. She waited. No answer. She was about to turn away when the lights inside flickered on. Inside that mansion lived William Sterling, a man known across the city as one of the richest but also the loneliest. Once full of ambition and energy, he now lived surrounded by silence. No family, no laughter, just the ticking of antique clocks and the rustle of old memories that refused to fade. He spent his days sitting in his grand study, staring at faded photographs and wondering when his life had lost its meaning. When he heard the soft knocking, he frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. Still, curiosity got the better of him. William opened the door and froze. Standing before him was a small black girl, her cheeks red from the cold, her eyes bright yet cautious. She held out a tiny basket filled with candies, her voice trembling as she said, "Good evening, sir. Would you like to buy some candies? They're sweet. Just made them this morning." There was something disarming about her presence. Fragile yet fearless, innocent yet full of quiet dignity. William's usual irritation melted into something softer. For a brief moment, he didn't see a poor child at his doorstep. He saw life knocking on the door he had shut long ago. "Candies?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. Maya nodded quickly, her small fingers tightening around the basket handle. "Just $1, sir. Please." He took a deep breath, noticing her shivering hands. Without saying much, he gestured her to come inside. "You'll catch a cold standing there," he muttered, almost to himself. Maya's eyes widened. No stranger had ever invited her in before. She stepped into the warm glow of the mansion, her shoes making soft, wet marks on the polished floor. The warmth of the fire hit her face, and for the first time that evening, she felt her body relax. William walked toward the kitchen and returned with a cup of hot cocoa and a small plate of cookies. He placed them in front of her. "Eat first, then I'll take all your candies," he said quietly. Maya's eyes sparkled with gratitude. She murmured, "Thank you, sir," and took small sips. Her cold hands wrapped around the cup like it was the most precious thing in the world. As William watched her, a strange feeling stirred inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Her smile reminded him of someone, but he couldn't quite place it. Her eyes, her gentle manner, they felt familiar. He brushed off the thought and asked, "What's your name?" "Maya," she said softly. "I sell candies after school. My grandma's sick, and I'm trying to save money for her medicine." William felt something twist in his chest. He had spent years surrounded by luxury, yet here sat a child who found joy in struggle and hope in hardship. For the first time in a long while, he smiled, faintly, awkwardly, but genuinely. "Well, Maya," he said, picking up one of the candies from her basket, "I think I'll take more than just one." The small girl's face lit up with joy, and as he tasted the candy, sweet, simple, handmade, Sterling didn't realize that this one meeting was about to change both of their lives forever. The warmth of the mansion wrapped around Maya like a blanket as she sat on the edge of a velvet chair, sipping her hot cocoa with both hands. The sweet smell of chocolate filled the air, and for the first time in a long while, she felt safe. William watched her from across the room, his expression unreadable. The crackling fireplace cast a soft glow on his face, revealing lines that spoke of age, loneliness, and years spent in silence. He wasn't used to company, especially not from a child who carried so much innocence in her tired little eyes. He cleared his throat, his voice rough from disuse. "Tell me, Maya," he said, "why do you spend your evenings selling candies instead of playing with your friends or doing homework?" Maya hesitated, lowering her cup. Her gaze dropped to the floor, where her shoes, scuffed and damp, rested awkwardly on the polished tiles. I do study, sir," she said softly. "But my grandma's medicine costs a lot and she can't work anymore, so I sell candies after school. It's not much, but it helps a little." William leaned back in his chair, his chest tightening. Her words struck a chord deep within him, stirring something buried long ago. He asked gently, "Where are your parents?" She hesitated again, as if the question itself carried a weight she couldn't lift. "Mama, she passed away when I was little," Maya whispered. "It's just me and Grandma now." Her voice trembled slightly, but she smiled as if forcing herself to stay strong. A long silence followed. William's gaze fell to the floor, his mind clouded with thoughts he couldn't name. There was something haunting about the way the girl spoke, something that made his heart ache with a guilt he didn't understand. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to shake off the strange feeling. "You're a brave girl," he murmured, "and your grandmother must be proud of you." Maya smiled shyly and nodded, her eyes glowing with a quiet gratitude. As she finished her drink, her curiosity began to take over. The mansion around her was unlike anything she had ever seen. The chandeliers sparkled like frozen stars, the grand piano stood untouched in the corner, and the walls were covered with portraits and paintings that told silent stories of another time. Every frame seemed to hold a piece of someone's life, faces frozen in laughter, love, and memories. She stood up, her small steps cautious as she wandered near the fireplace. Her gaze moved from one photograph to another until something stopped her cold. There, on the mantelpiece, stood a photo in a golden frame, a picture of a young woman smiling softly, her eyes kind and full of life. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Her tiny hands trembled as she reached toward it, her heart beating faster with every passing second. The woman in the photo wasn't a stranger. It was her mother. She blinked several times as if trying to convince herself it wasn't just her imagination. But the resemblance was undeniable. The same eyes, the same curve of the lips, even the necklace around her neck. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "That's my mom." She turned to William, her eyes wide with confusion. "Why is my mom's photo in your house?" The words hit William like a thunderclap. His body went still, and the color drained from his face. For a long, unbearable moment, he didn't speak. The photo in question, of Elena, had sat on that mantel for years, untouched, collecting dust along with his regrets. He slowly rose from his chair, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. He approached Maya, his hands trembling as if afraid to touch the frame, his eyes fixed on the photograph, then on Maya's face. The same bright eyes, the same expression. The room seemed to spin around him. "What did you say?" he asked hoarsely. Maya swallowed hard. "That's my mom," she repeated, her voice breaking. Her name was Elena. The name shattered the last bit of control William had. His knees weakened and he gripped the edge of the fireplace for balance. Memories came rushing back in fragments. Elena's laughter, her soft voice calling his name, the nights they spent dreaming of a future they were never allowed to have. She had been the love of his life, the one he lost to the cruelty of the world. Society, family, and pride had torn them apart, and he had spent decades trying to bury that pain beneath success and solitude. Now, standing before him was the living proof of everything he had lost, and everything he didn't know he still had. He looked at Maya, his voice barely a whisper. "Elena!" He breathed as if the name itself carried the weight of all the years gone by. "Your mother? Was she happy?" Maya frowned, confused and still trembling. "She worked a lot," she said quietly. "She used to sing to me when I was scared. She said we didn't need anyone else, that love was enough." A tear rolled down William's cheek before he could stop it. He turned away, his chest tightening with a pain he hadn't felt in years. In that moment, Maya didn't understand everything, but she could feel the heaviness in the air, the sorrow that seemed to wrap around the old man like a shadow. She took a step back, her young voice shaking. "How do you know her?" she asked. William didn't answer immediately. He stared at the fire, its orange flames dancing against his eyes. Finally, with a trembling voice, he said, "Because I once loved her more than anything in this world." The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy at the same time. Maya's lips parted in disbelief. Her heart pounded, confusion filling her small face. The flickering firelight made their shadows stretch across the room. Two lost souls standing at the edge of a truth that would change everything. William's eyes, filled with regret and wonder, met hers again. And in that shared silence, both of them knew. Nothing about their lives would ever be the same again. The fire crackled softly as William stood motionless, staring at the photograph that had reopened a wound he thought had long healed. His breath came unevenly, his hands trembling as he sank slowly into the chair behind him. The weight of years pressed heavily on his chest. Maya stood a few steps away, her small frame tense, her eyes darting between the photo and the old man before her. She could sense something enormous, something painful, hanging in the silence between them. Finally, William spoke, his voice distant, almost as if he were speaking to the past. "Your mother, Elena," he whispered. "She was the most extraordinary woman I ever met." Maya's heart raced, her brows furrowed in confusion. William's eyes glazed with memories as he looked toward the dancing fire. "I was young then," he continued softly, "and foolishly proud. My family owned this estate and they believed money could buy everything, even happiness. But then, one evening, at a charity event downtown, I met her. She wasn't like anyone else. She laughed with her whole heart, spoke her mind without fear. She worked as a teacher at the local community school, always surrounded by children. She told me once that kindness was a kind of wealth too, one that never runs out." He smiled faintly through the ache in his chest. "She was right, of course. I loved her more than I thought a man like me could love anyone." His tone broke and the next words came out heavy. "But the world didn't love us back. My family disapproved. They said she wasn't one of us, that I would ruin our name. They threatened to disinherit me, to destroy her reputation. I was a coward. I thought I could protect her by walking away. But in truth, I just left her." Maya felt her throat tighten, disbelief mixing with anger. She wanted to speak, but no words came. William's voice grew weaker as he continued. "I tried to find her years later, after my parents died. But she had vanished. Every trail went cold. I thought maybe she had moved on. Maybe she had someone who loved her better than I ever could. He paused, his eyes glistening. But when I saw your face tonight, when you said her name, I realized how wrong I was. You're not just her daughter, Maya. His voice cracked completely. You're mine too. The room went still. The only sound was the slow, steady ticking of the clock on the wall. Maya blinked at him, stunned. What? She whispered. Her voice was small, trembling, like a child caught between fear and hope. No, that can't be true. She shook her head violently, stepping back. You're lying. You're just saying that because you feel sorry for me. Her eyes filled with tears, and she turned toward the door. But William stood and reached out his hand, his voice desperate. Maya, please. I would never lie about this. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know. She pulled away from his reach, her breathing quick and shallow. Then prove it, she said, her tone sharper now, laced with pain. If you're telling the truth, prove that my mother knew you. William hesitated only a moment before rushing out of the room. His footsteps echoed down the long hallway. Maya stood frozen, her hands clutching the basket of candies as if it were the only solid thing left in her world. When he returned, he was holding an old wooden box, worn at the corners, its hinges rusted with age. He placed it gently on the table and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were stacks of yellowed letters tied with ribbon, a few faded photographs, and a small silver pendant shaped like a heart. William lifted the pendant, his eyes softening as he looked at it. She wore this every day, he said quietly. She told me it was her good luck charm. Look on the back. Maya hesitated, then stepped closer. She took the pendant in her trembling hand and turned it over. Her eyes widened as she read the small engraved words, Forever yours. W. Her lips parted in disbelief, her vision blurring as tears filled her eyes. She picked up one of the old letters, opening it carefully. The paper was fragile, the ink faded, but she could still read her mother's handwriting. My dearest William, I wish the world were kinder to us. I wish you had been braver. But I still keep hope alive, because love doesn't die, even when people do. The letter slipped from Maya's hands as her knees gave way. She pressed her palms to her face, sobbing softly. The room seemed to spin around her, her entire world rewriting itself in seconds. William knelt beside her, his old knees trembling under his weight. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't deserve her, and I don't deserve you. But I searched for her for years. I thought maybe she'd built a better life. I never imagined she was struggling, that she was alone. His voice broke and tears streamed freely down his weathered cheeks. If I could trade everything I have, all the money, all the houses, all the years, just to have one more chance with her, I would. Maya looked at him through her tears, her heart torn between anger and sorrow. She never stopped loving you, she whispered, even when it hurt. William's breath caught. He lowered his head, his shoulders shaking. Then I failed her twice, he murmured. Once when I left, and again when I wasn't there to protect her. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with grief and realization. Finally, Maya reached out, hesitantly at first, and placed the pendant in his hand. She kept this all her life, she said softly. Maybe she wanted you to find it someday. William clutched it tightly, his tears falling onto the metal surface. He looked at Maya, the reflection of the fire dancing in both their eyes. Maybe, he whispered, this is fate giving me one last chance, not to fix the past, but to care for what's left of it. And for the first time that night their shared pain felt a little less heavy, as if love, though long buried, had finally found its way home. The days that followed moved gently, like a soft breeze carrying the scent of spring after a long winter. The mansion, once an echoing chamber of silence, began to fill with sounds it hadn't known in years, footsteps that weren't lonely, laughter that didn't fade against cold walls, and the warmth of voices sharing stories over dinner. William kept his promise. The morning after that tearful revelation, he personally went to find Maya's grandmother, bringing doctors, nurses, and medicine to their small, broken home. The old woman, frail but proud, couldn't believe her eyes when she saw the same man her granddaughter had described, the man from the mansion, standing in her doorway, hat in hand, eyes filled with humility. Within days, both Maya and her grandmother moved into the mansion. What once stood as a monument to emptiness slowly transformed into a home. The chandeliers glowed not from wealth, but from joy. The kitchen, once untouched, now smelled of fresh bread and sugar every morning as Maya baked candies and sweet treats for the staff who had grown to adore her. William often found himself standing at the kitchen door, watching her hum softly while stirring melted sugar in a pot, her tiny hands working with patience and care. It reminded him of Elena, her quiet strength, her grace, and he would smile. A real smile, the kind he hadn't known in decades. Maya's grandmother recovered quickly under the care of good doctors, her eyes softening each time she saw William tending to the garden himself. "You've given us more than help," she told him one afternoon, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've given us peace." William shook his head gently and replied, "It's your granddaughter who gave me mine." As the weeks passed, a rhythm formed between them. William began teaching Maya to read the books in his library, showing her worlds beyond what she had known. She, in return, taught him small, simple joys, how to whistle again, how to make pancakes that always burned on one side, how to laugh without restraint. They would sit together by the fireplace in the evenings, sharing stories, his from the past, hers from her little adventures around town. For every story he told of success and power, she told one about kindness and faith. It was as though the mansion itself was listening, grateful that its long silence had finally been broken. One morning, Maya asked him to take her somewhere special. They drove in silence to the old part of town where the cemetery stood under a canopy of oak trees. The wind whispered softly through the leaves as they walked between the rows of graves. When they reached the small marble stone that bore Elena's name, Maya knelt down, placing a single candy wrapped in gold foil on the grass. "Mama used to say sweet things help sad hearts," she whispered. William stood beside her, his eyes glistening. He placed a white rose next to the candy and said softly, "I kept you in my heart all these years, Elena. I was too late to make things right with you, but I promise I'll make things right with her." His voice broke, and Maya quietly took his hand. They stood there for a long time, their hands joined, 2 generations bound by one woman's love. From that day on, the mansion truly began to change. The servants smiled more, music played in the halls, and sunlight seemed to linger longer in every room. William no longer sat alone in his study. He spent his evenings helping Maya with her homework, her laughter echoing through the halls like a melody he never wanted to forget. Sometimes she would make him close his eyes and taste the candies she made, asking him to guess the flavor. He was almost always wrong, but he loved pretending just so he could see her grin. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned golden, they sat together in the garden, the air scented with roses. Maya handed him a small wrapped candy, her eyes twinkling. "This one's special," she said. William chuckled and unwrapped it carefully. "Oh? Why's that?" he asked. She looked at him with that same radiant smile that reminded him of Elena and said softly, "Because you bought one candy and got your family back." William froze for a moment, his heart tightening in his chest. He looked at her, tears filling his eyes, and for the first time in many years, he let them fall freely. "And you," he said, his voice trembling, "sold one candy and found your father." The 2 of them sat there quietly, the golden light bathing them in warmth, the world around them still and peaceful. Later that night, as Maya went to bed, she turned to look back at the old man standing in the hallway, smiling softly at her. She whispered, "Good night, Dad." William closed his eyes, his heart swelling with emotion. "Good night, my little miracle," he whispered back. The camera would linger then on the mansion, no longer cold, no longer lonely. Its windows glowed, softly under the moonlight, laughter echoing faintly from within. Maya's voice would fade in gently over the scene, calm and full of life. Sometimes fate doesn't knock twice, but when it does, it opens hearts that were never meant to stay closed. The fire crackled once more in the grand fireplace, and somewhere in the corner, on the mantel, the old photograph of Elena now stood between two new ones, one of Maya holding her grandmother's hand, and another of all three together, smiling like a family reborn. The story ended not with wealth or grand gestures, but with the simple warmth of belonging, the kind of happiness money could never buy. For more stories like this, subscribe to Simply Stories.